Tomato season is just around the corner, and now's the time to improve your soil's fertility and prepare for planting day so that you get huge tomato harvest and not just a huge tomato plant. Plus, some simple steps to take to prevent pests and disease. Start saving your eggshells. Tomatoes need calcium, and by starting to save your eggshells now, they can dry and be pulverized at the time of planting. Large eggshell pieces take a long time to break down, and your tomatoes won't benefit from them this year unless they've been pulverized. This way, the microbes in the soil can make them available for the tomato plants when they need it. The calcium in the eggshells can help prevent blossom end rot. Most times, blossom end rot is caused by extremely wet periods of time alternating with dry periods, or even really high humidity can cause it. By adding a calcium source at planting time, like your ground eggshells or even a ground oyster shell, can really help prevent that blossom end rot. Adding phosphorus to your soil should be done weeks before planting your tomatoes. 4 to 6 weeks is best. This allows enough time for the microbes to break it down so that it's usable for those plants to uptake. Phosphorus needs to be added down into the soil at root level, because if it's just on the surface, it's not going to do your plant much good. Phosphorus has a hard time working its way into the soil to that root level. Phosphorus needs to be worked down into that soil at least 3 to 4 inches. Phosphorus is responsible for the root development and healthy bud development. That means tomatoes. Here's some food for thought. All plants need nitrogen. Nitrogen is an essential macronutrient that all plants need for leafy green growth. But tomatoes don't need that much nitrogen, and you don't want to feed a heavy nitrogen source. Not only does too much nitrogen produce too much leafy green growth on tomatoes, but it can also restrict the calcium uptake as well. Using a well-balanced fertilizer early in the season is just fine, but never feed a nitrogen source during the growing season of your tomatoes. More tomatoes have been killed by a frost than any other disease. The term last average frost doesn't mean it's absolutely your last frost that you'll have of the season, but it does give you a good gauge of when you can plant your tomatoes out. But always look at the 10-day forecast before you do put them out. Tomatoes absolutely will not survive temperatures 35 degrees and lower. Soil temperatures should be at least 60 degrees before you plant your tomatoes out. Anything cooler than that, then the tomatoes will just sit there and not grow very quickly. And that can cause them to stress out, and that's no way to start them out. Get yourself a soil thermometer and test your soil's temperature before planting your tomatoes out. They're inexpensive, and I'll put a link in the description of where you can find one. I personally do recommend staking or caging your tomatoes rather than letting them sprawl across the ground. By staking and caging, this increases air circulation, and that decreases disease. It also increases the sun exposure, which helps the tomatoes to ripen faster. And you get an earlier harvest, picking is a lot easier, and the pest pressure isn't as bad. If your tomatoes are sprawling across the ground, slugs and snails have easy access to them. If your trellising system is set or your tomato cages are ready, you're more likely to use them when it comes time to plant your tomatoes. If you wait until the tomato plants are large, it's hard to get that tomato cage over them without breaking the stems. And when you push that tomato cage into the ground, you can damage the root system. And trellising or training your tomatoes up a trellis system is a lot easier when you start out when they're small. Don't mulch your tomato plants too early. By mulching early, this makes that soil stay cool. Wait until your temperatures are around 80s. Then you can start to mulch heavily, because then that'll help keep those root systems cooler, which makes a better blossom set, keeps moisture in, and weeds out. If you have at least 6 to 8 weeks before planting your tomatoes out, you might want to consider planting a cover crop of hairy vetch in the area that you'll be planting your tomatoes. Tomatoes are quite susceptible to soil-borne pathogens like early blight and septorial leaf spot. Tomatoes grown after a crop of hairy vetch have been proven to have less leaf disease, and their yields are higher. Hairy vetch has also been proven to decrease disease in other vegetables as well. Plant a smorgasbord of pollinator-friendly plants. By doing so, you'll decrease the pest population by improving biological control. Plant nasturtiums amongst your tomatoes to help repel the beet leaf hopper. And borage, that helps repel the tomato hornworm. It's been proven time and time again that a diverse landscape will have less pest pressure and fewer outbreaks. That sounds like a divine creation if you ask me. Work with Mother Nature and not against it. If you've ever had a problem with root knot nematodes, which are a real nightmare for growing tomatoes, you can add some organic matter that contains chitin. Shrimp holes and crab shells both contain chitin. They need to be ground and put into your soil where you're planting your tomatoes several weeks before you plant the tomatoes. The microorganisms that dine on these forms of chitin will move on to the chitin found in nematode eggs, lessening the problem by outnumbering the amount of bad nematodes. Apply plenty of compost too. This keeps your soil biologically active. The best nematode predators are the fungi and the beneficial nematodes that are found in biologically active soil. Curly leaf virus can be a real problem, especially in warm climates. This is when the affected tomato plant, especially the new growth, ends up having curled and twisted leaves. The leaves will also become stiff and yellow, and eventually this will kill the plant. You can wrap your tomato plant with a floating row cover. Leaving the top open is just fine. This discourages the beet leafhopper from infecting your tomato plants. Gather your floating row cover so that you have it ready when the temperatures start to warm. For us, in our Zone 8, southern Utah, that's usually about mid-May to early June. When planting out your tomatoes, you can plant them deeply or use the trenching method. When you plant them deeply, this keeps those roots cooler, and this should be done when you live in areas that have hot summers, like ours. If you want to use a trench method, this is better for areas that have shorter, milder summers where your temperatures don't usually go above 90 degrees. As your tomato starts to grow, prune those leaves, those lower leaves up the stem to about 6 inches to 12 inches to keep them off of the ground. Fungal diseases begin on the older, lower leaves of the plant because they sit so close to the ground. By pruning them up, you reduce those chances of the soil pathogens infecting the plant. Making compost tea and spraying a diluted solution on your plants weekly can really strengthen your plants, make them more healthy and more resistant to pests and diseases as well. I like to add the plant horsetail to my compost tea, and this just adds more protection against early blight. Consider saving seeds this year. By saving seeds from the tomatoes that you've grown, they'll be adapted to your climate better. They'll grow better and produce better. If you don't know how to save your tomato seeds, then I do have an oldie moldy video. It is thorough and complete, and it will teach you how to save your seeds properly. And I'll put a link here. And besides that, learning to save your own seeds is just another step to self-sufficiency. Thanks for joining me today. Have a successful tomato growing season. God bless you, your family, and your garden.